Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames, a sequel to The Kings of the Wyld, but did it hold up? Did it reach the same heights as Big Brother? Now, I reviewed Kings of the Wyld just the other day on this channel, and I had some really positive things to say about it, and I think most people who have read it did. It became super popular, super fast, and with that comes very high expectations for the follow-up. Enter Bloody Rose, a book that had the weight of the world on its shoulders, an absolute giant to live up to. And for the most part, I'd say that Nicholas Eames did a pretty damn good job, but with a few caveats and some that I just can't seem to shake. There were just some things about Kings of the Wyld that made it such an enjoyable read, and without a doubt, what stood out the most for me were the characters. And yet in Bloody Rose, he made a very bold decision to introduce a full new set of characters with some of our returning favorites. Don't worry, no spoilers. Now, this wasn't a problem, and I actually think it was a really good idea because a new set of characters meant that he could connect with his readers in different ways through new perspectives, new personalities, and some new, very, very different themes. And believe me when I tell you, this book had a lot more depth and a lot heavier themes than its predecessor. For example, now we have some LGBT characters, we have characters who are dealing with drug issues, PTSD, family issues, parenting issues, and a lot more relatable themes and issues that were executed beautifully by the author. And because I felt that he was able to deal with these issues so naturally, it felt like it gave him a great platform to execute some really heartfelt, heavy, hard-hitting moments in this story, way more than I expected. Don't get me wrong, the overall tone of Bloody Rose is still very light and humorous and adventurous, just as Kings of the Wyld was, and it's still a very light-hearted read at its core. And in fact, I think the author struck a really nice balance between these light, adventurous moments and the really hard-hitting emotional ones, and I really appreciated that as a reader. But I did have one glaring issue that I just can't seem to shake. For me, these characters took a really long time to connect with, probably about 150 pages, and for such a short, fast-paced book, that felt like a really long time. And what exacerbated that was that it was the exact opposite experience I had with Kings of the Wyld. And I think I know why. Like I said, the characters in Bloody Rose had a lot more depth and were a lot more complex, and you would think that that would allow you to connect more with these characters, but I didn't find that to be the case, and I think it's because they were the opposite of Saga from Kings of the Wyld. Saga had very strong, deep-seated values, and their motivations always felt very pure and very simple to me, whereas Fable came from a very different perspective. They had one goal in mind, and that was fame and fortune, even if it meant not worrying about the rest of the world that clearly needed their help. And it was only later in the book where their values started to change and we started to understand why they were the way they were. And that might have been an intentional juxtaposition by the author between Saga and Fable from Kings of the Wyld and Bloody Rose. But what it did was it kept these characters at arm's reach for me. It didn't allow me to connect and get close to them for a lot longer. Moving back to the positives though, the magic in this book actually felt like an area where Nicholas Eames really improved on its predecessor. It felt like this magic was a lot more prevalent, more of the characters seemed to have it and wield it more often. It felt far more flary and just really, really entertaining. And to give you a really little taste of that, one of the characters was an ink witch, which meant that she could turn her body art and her tattoos into living beings, temporary living beings that could actually fight for her. And that was beautifully written, beautifully executed, and something fairly unique as far as I've read. As for the world building, not much to report on. It was very, very similar to Kings of the Wyld, and really it was quite nice because it felt like I just stepped right back into the same world that was really familiar. Overall, I'd still say that it was a great read, and it will satisfy most of the readers, especially if you already loved Kings of the Wyld. Just make sure you go in knowing that it's not an exact replica. There's a lot more depth. The characters are more complex. It takes a little bit longer to get started and to start really connecting with these characters. And also, it is a new set of characters with some favorites that return. No spoilers, so just make sure you're aware of that. That's going to do it for this review. Thanks for joining me. Subscribe if you haven't already. Give this video a thumbs up. Help me grow this brand new channel, and I'll catch you next time. See ya!